I'm going to get a hold of our boss, Rita Courtwright, and talk to her about that. But in the meantime, we have been covering a lot of space, and the election itself is up and down, a roller coaster kind of thing.
Yeah.
We had one election done with 10 candidates, I think, running for principal chief, and then, of course, Mr. Tiger's legal problems there changed everything.
Yes.
And then the other Mr. Tiger, Lucian III, has weighed in with saying that there's problems with the whole thing and we have to junk it and do it all over. Have you been following that part of it?
Yeah, a little bit. We were kind of looking when Speaker Tiger filed. He filed two different things actually in this the past election. The first one, he filed for a recount, and then he filed a motion with the courts alleging possible improprieties or allegations of fraud or irregularities. I believe that's how it's termed. And it turned out that the courts did in fact kind of hear that. The Supreme Court was called for a hearing, and I have to word it just right, because they didn't say in their report that fraud took place. The court opinion didn't say that, but they did come up with some things that made them question the integrity of the election, and so we are put into this do-over kind of phase. We're doing it all over again. They threw out the results. All the candidates and all the different positions, whether it was chief or second chief or the national council seats, are running again. And as a result of that, I think that we've seen some candidates believe that they were just going to withdraw, and so we have less candidates on the ballot for principal chief this time around. I'm a little sad there's no ladies on there now. The ladies have pulled out of the running, and they've issued this new sample ballot, and you can see who's running for what, and we're waiting for those. Some people are looking for their absentee ballots to come in the mail now. We're starting that process again. So I've been kind of following along on social media, and they're saying that because of that holiday, I guess, that was when the ballots were going to go out. The next day they went out, and so they're asking folks to be checking those mailboxes if you haven't received your ballot today, to get on the phone and let them know. And they have issued a little brief statement on their Facebook saying that today is kind of the day that if you haven't gotten it, you should notify them, and they can I think the plan is to overnight them to voters, and so that they can get those ballots back in the mail ASAP and get them turned in so that everybody's vote counts. So we're going to be watching closely. We had some really great election coverage of our first run. It was, for our department anyway, it was a kind of a different thing that we'd done. We had a band come in and play as we waited for the results to come in. We had a lot of positive feedback that night. People were tuned in, and we had over, I think most of the time that we were streaming live, we had over 100 viewers watching. So those were some great numbers for our live stream, and we were really excited about that. The Creek people were on our, live stream, and they were putting out their comments and their different thoughts and stuff. So it was neat to connect that way and see other Mvskoke people waiting on those election results that night, and we're hoping to do that again. So
right, it seemed like our end of the bargain, our coverage, as you mentioned, was a lot more up to date. We're making this information accessible to citizens and voters quickly, and hopefully as accurate as we can get it.
Yeah, we work with the election board. They get us this link to the live feed where they are recording those results as they're coming in, and we just broadcast that for our live stream, kind of in a split screen with, in the downtime when they're not announcing these new precincts that are coming in, we have the band playing and stuff like that. So it was kind of a nice little I know from just participating in the side of making sure and getting phone calls done behind the scenes, it looked like people were enjoying that reporting. So I was pretty excited about that.
Well, it reminds me of election coverage I've worked on in other stations in other states. They have a kind of a lively aspect to it,
Yes.
quick, constant reporting and updating, and then a little pause here and there to talk to a candidate or two or a voter, see how things are going. So I think we're, for the crew that we have working, that turned out pretty well. And I think it shows well for Mvskoke media, if we might blow our own horn there a little bit.
It's not like we have those like big staffs or lots of resources like some of those big networks might have, but there was that palpable election night energy, and we were able to tap into that and provide information as soon as we got it. That anytime you can connect live and during the event that you're covering is just a totally different perspective of doing the news. I think it's a wonderful kind of I always say that reporters and us news people are trying to take the pulse of our environment, and so that one is one of those nights where the pulse is kind of racing a little bit, and people are excited for the event, and the energy is really palpable. So
you're right. I don't know of too many other places where this kind of coverage is available. I've never seen it at any other tribal place. So.
It's kind of it's been unique that we have that advantage of some of our staff has been around a little while, and they've built upon this, and so we're able to do it. And I think that it's even kind of like some of us weren't necessarily assigned to election coverage, but we're like up there hanging out at the office just because it's kind of the fun place to be, and you're curious, So rather than sitting at home just waiting, like you're I could watch it at home, but then it's always fun to be able to come in and make a call to help out the team, kind of thing. So we had a good thing going on that, and we're hoping to keep that rolling for us.
Okay, let's take a few seconds here to kind of update the status right now. The first election was wiped out.
Yeah, null and void.
And the election board and staff there, and courts, whoever, have now set up a second one, right? And do we have dates and things on that yet?
Let me grab some dates real quick for you, because I've seen those posted up. We're going to take a quick look and find them. I know they're pretty easily available on social media, so I'm going to just check out the election board.
Now, we've been actually getting phone calls from confused voters, people wanting to know what they, what's going on and what are they supposed to do. I had a lady call the other day and asked me whether or not she had to re-register for voting, all the way from
really early on after the Supreme Court delivered their opinion. There was that kind of period of, okay, what's going on? And we did get lots of calls. People wanted to know, if I'm going to be an absentee voter in the future, if this is getting done over, do I need to re-request my ballot? Things like that. And I think after a few days of everybody getting caught up on the paperwork, they did issue a statement saying that if you were an absentee ballot voter in the last election, that first run, then you would be automatically given the ballot this time round. And but then I seen that people were making comments on social media saying they wanted to make sure. So I'm sure that the election board has had a lot of calls to field because it's just been a little bit confusing. This isn't the kind of typical outcome that you expect from the election. So people are trying to stay on point. And I've heard that, like, almost one of the slogans kind of out there is to, like, for citizens to just not get frustrated and to make sure and participate this time around, I think is what the main message is. Make sure they get in there and vote again. It's I think that everything I looked up statistic-wise was indicative that anytime there's a do-over election, it's almost like you lose some of the participants who were voting, like they get frustrated or stressed out by it. So I think that the major message is that it's a process, and people can, just make sure that they stay in there and hang with it. And
as far as I know and have been able to see, then everyone's status remains the same. They don't have to re-register. They don't have to do any of that. Just wait for it. If you are on that absentee list, then you should go ahead and get one. I mean, they're going to follow their own procedures again. Mm-hmm. And if you vote in person, then you'll come in and vote.
Yeah, vote at the precincts. I got those dates for you, though. It says here that this is the latest one I've seen released at the election board office, the major dates coming up. The general election anyway, the November 19th is the absentee request deadline, and by 5 p.m. November 22nd is the absentee ballots mailed to voters. December 4th will be precinct voter registration closing. So you need to, precinct voters would register. If you're registering, you do that by 5 p.m. on December 4th. And then on December 11th and 12th is early in-person voting. And December 14th is the general election. So let me just look through and scan and find the current primary election dates here. They're kind of got those separated a little bit. So
when our voters look at a ballot, they will note that it is shorter because of a number of people who dropped out, who kind of saw the handwriting on the wall and said, it's not worth the expense and time to campaign again when I've only got X number of votes, and I was toward the bottom of the stack, so to speak. We do encourage everyone to go out and vote and remain part of our electoral process. This is where we select a leadership for the Mvskoke Creek Nation. And we understand it's kind of frustrating, to have to see this and go through it yet again, but it's still important, perhaps even more important now that they participate in the election.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. I think like I always try to take the measure of my feelings, because I'm a citizen, and then I'm a journalist, and I kind of can sympathize with that stress and confusion, because I was kind of sitting there, okay, I have a lot of information to get out to voters, and then I have to make sure it's correct. What are we looking at here? And so I definitely can sympathize there, where people would get a little bit, because I might have a little bit of an advantage of being exposed to some of the things we see, news-wise, and knowing the process, but, average citizen probably doesn't always have that insight, and so I can see that would be something that they might kind of go, okay, what's going on here?
So we're looking at doing this all over again, and as far as I know, the major changes, of course, would be the elimination of George Tiger, which changed the whole scheme of the ballot, the whole layup plan, because of the lawsuit. And then we have another candidate who is in the midst of federal proceedings that could or could not be likewise eliminated.
And George Tiger was, it was kind of weird the way that kind of played out, because he was, registered on the ballot, he's a candidate, and then an indictment comes out. Mm-hmm. And I think really early on, people would see that he was campaigning, but also know that he had these alleged charges. And so they would go, why? What's going on? And then you kind of take a look into the law, and you know that you're presumed innocent until found guilty. And the window of that kind of played out a little funny, because our absentee ballots had been issued with his name on it. He hadn't been proven guilty at the time. It's just an indictment, which isn't, admission of guilt, and it's not a sentence, so he was on the ballot. And then the ballots went out, I believe, early in the week, and that Friday is when we found out on a Wednesday there was a special hearing where he might be changing his plea in federal court. And then sure enough, Friday we go to federal court. I remember that being the 13th, and it was confirmed that he changed his plea to guilty. But those absentee ballots had already gone out at that time, and so I think that might have, was one of the points that were listed in the court filing on the irregularity side, is that it might have confused voters to see him on there, because he didn't get the least votes. When we were looking at those tallies come in, he did get I think 150 votes, despite that. And even after he changed his plea, he still hasn't been sentenced. So there was that question of, do you leave him on until he's sentenced, or do you take him off, I guess? And I think that the courts helped kind of clear some of that up.
Right, Friday the 13th.
Yeah, that was kind of a bad omen on that one.
Bad omen, yeah, tough one. Okay, so we have eliminated him. He kind of eliminated himself, rather. And then we proceeding on with the other candidates, one of which, as we said, is still in the midst of federal proceedings.
Well, Steve Bruner's proceedings aren't federal yet.
Okay.
I think at one time they had been in federal court, but now they're strictly in the Mvskoke Creek Nation District Court. And we're seeing this case play out. And there was a felony charge alleging possession of illegal gaming. Somehow, I can't remember the exact wording of that without having the paperwork in front of me. But that was filed back, this is a couple of years ago, when I think a lot of people remember seeing that on the news. They went in and raided this facility.
Right, yeah, Light Horse went in and confiscated these machines and the
and we're
bookkeeping.
seeing now the most recent development. He's still on the ballot. He hasn't pled guilty to these charges or anything like that. But we've seen about a week after the Supreme Court ruled that this election's going to be a do-over, right? They deem it null and valid. A week later, our Attorney General files more charges in this case. And there's now another defendant, and there's felony counts of, I would have to look at the paperwork to know what they all are, but they all center around conspiracy for gaming fraud and things like that. He just actually there was a court date yesterday, but a continuance was filed for Bruner, and they're going to continue that on to November 14th. So it'll be after the primary election when these new charges, he appears in court for that. There's another person who's been named as a defendant in this case too. Jeremiah Hobaya is facing these allegations as well. And then they also put a misdemeanor charge on Bruner for improper use of seal. And we're seeing that filed in our courts. So there's a lot of unique components to this election.
Wasn't there a guy from Texas that was included in this? What's his name, Terry or something?
The Terry Dwayne or something like that. That was associated with the George Tiger. Okay. I remember back in...
This is getting a little confusing.
It is. All these webs kind of spiral out. So back in about December or January, I got a indictment release from the Eastern District Attorney General's office, and they had an indictment for two people, and they were employees of the Alabama Casardi tribal town. One of their businesses. These two employees had alleged theft, embezzlement, some kind of I think even fraud. Basically, they were taking money somehow. And the latest thing I've seen is that that person, that Terry guy in Texas, he's from Wichita Falls or something like that. Texas was found guilty, and it appears to be that investigation is what led them to put these charges on George Tiger. So that is related, those two, George Tiger and this latest indictment for the employees in about the A&Q tribes business ventures. I think that it looks like the Terry might have plea dealed to get out of, because there was many charges. I wanted to say 12 or so for him, and it looks like there was a plea deal of some sort where he participated in handing over, some kind of something that linked it to George Tiger, and that's how we've seen those charges arise. So the person who was the genesis of that charge has just been found guilty.
Well, I understand George Tiger now pleaded guilty, and then there were like 8 other charges that were dropped in favor of that.
I think that when I was originally looking at they had originally charged him with bribery, and I don't know that they ever dropped any on George. I know he did have some kind of plea deal, but it kind of centered around how much time he would get and how he would pay back restitution. So he didn't get any really lesser charges, and for George Tiger, they stayed the same, felony embezzlement, and the same kind of punishment classification, because in the federal courts, they have a classification for crimes, and they take all these little factors and they kind of have this formula where they put it together and decide what kind of a sentence you get. And so I think that his pleading guilty did get him some kind of leniency on either the restitution or the time served, the punishment, possible time served kind of aspect of it. We still haven't seen him sentenced, though, so it's still, kind of the unanswered question of, would he be facing jail time, or is he going to just be paying back restitution? We haven't seen that play out yet.
Okay, well, it's a pretty heavy load, and I don't know, how do you keep up with it? I mean, so many new developments and things.
I have notebooks, like I just look at that every day in my phone calendar, and it just tells me where to go and what to do. But I really look forward to the days I get to get out of that, either the courtroom or the office, and come and be on the radio and chat a little bit. It's nice to have those. And sometimes I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to do a feature story out of the blue because I just need a brain break from the legal stuff, and that's kind of how I deal with it. But I think that at some level, collecting that kind of information, I feel like it's almost like a service. So that's what really drives me to go and pursue it, even when it's boring or tedious, or you're like, oh man, you see things develop and you're banging your head against the wall,
right, the frustration.
But
does get
that
to you.
that citizens need it, so you that's the kind of drive to go and do it, because I know that I wouldn't know about it any other way. It's not fortunately, I think that some of the communities that the Mvskoke Creek Nation operates in, the news does pay attention to them, but not always as in-depth as we get to. So I feel like the citizens are really counting on us, so it makes it a little easier to kind of sit through court on those slow days.
Well, yeah, it makes it all worthwhile. Now, the feedback that I've got is pretty minimal, and people say, hey, good job, da-da-da.
I always take that as a good sign. If the feedback is minimal, you're not really, upsetting anyone too much, maybe that's a good sign. Yeah,
if you hear a lot, it's usually the griping. Say, what do you mean by doing this?
Yeah.
But, when you hear it a little bit there, my gosh, it is all worthwhile, and I'm glad that we did it. And, we hung in there. As we go along, we're going to have to reconstitute our crew and go at it again. And we've got some young people now on staff who are just sort of a baptism by fire kind of thing.
I feel like they were I think other than you and I and a few others, the long-standing employees are few months in, and to come in, I think that our more recent hires had maybe a month or so before we dived into an election season, so I cannot imagine ever doing that as my first gig.
Right,
scary.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's actually happened to us a few times. One reporter came in just as a big embezzlement case broke, and another situation when I think there was some kind of malfeasance within the tribe, and guess what you get to do,
Yeah, that's always a scary first thing for a reporter of any kind. I think that my very first things I covered at the tribe was Constitutional Convention,
Oh,
which
gosh.
absolutely blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. You know, it was the meetings leading up to. That's when I came on board for the first time at the tribe, and when they were planning for that event, and I had no idea what kind of magnitude we were talking about. And that was, I mean, I even say to this day, like, I survived Constitutional Convention, so I can do this.
Yeah, the long march, so to speak. And that really does take a lot out of you, because you've got to spend all this energy and time, you know, staying up with it. And you keep asking yourself, did I get this correct? Now, is this quote perhaps exactly the way it came off?
Yeah.
Right source, the right time, does it still fit?
Oh, there are so many nuances, and then, like, you even wonder, you know, at what point do you, you know, with the nature of, like, covering legislation and stuff like that, it's like, okay, here's this candidate who may be running for office. Do I quote them? Did I quote them too much? Is that free press? You know, like, you kind of have to really pay attention to all the little, you know, details of giving them, you know, too much spotlight. If they're, you know, it's very difficult, I think, when you get into a niche kind of coverage like what we do. You have to really know what you're doing, and that's what's scary for some of the new journalists coming in. And I don't like to admit this very much, but this is technically my first election to cover and be employed at the tribe. So I mean, I have like 4 or 5 years, but it's not been timed to be through an election. So even I'm kind of you know, a little bamboozled by this one at times.
Well, hang in there. I think, you know, all of our crew is doing a pretty good job in keeping up. Now, just to give you an example of what it can be like is when I worked at the public radio station in Alaska at Anchorage, when election time rolled around, that's an all-night affair.
Oh, wow.
It's so you start early trying to do your setups, you know, like Tony's, you know, whoever is meeting, he's going to cast his ballot, you know, the fluffy stuff.
Yeah.
And then as they, you know, the votes start coming in, you can feel the energy ramp up. Think, okay, well, when are we going to get our first counts, and does anybody have any feel or predictions? And you try to do that without hanging anyone, particularly yourself.
Right.
And then as the numbers come in, you try and keep up with it. And think, okay, well, the last count, Bill Smith had, you know, X number of votes, and he's ahead of Joe Jones by, you know, like 14%.
Right, like this last precinct rolled in and it put them ahead or behind by this many. That's a job and a half. Like, we didn't quite cover it like that. I think it would have took a lot more manpower to analyze at that level. But I did find that when we were watching things roll in, you would see, you know, we were all sitting there and it was like, oh gosh, they haven't popped up the absentee yet. You know, you were just kind of waiting. You knew maybe which kind of things to watch for to see if there were going to be like major fluctuations. And so I could see how that would be an interesting 24 hours to cover that.
Oh, right. And then you're trying to stay awake, one, and then two, try and create this accurate story. And here it is, 3:30 in the morning, and, you know, you're drooping over your keyboard.
I was a little tired when we did election coverage, because, like, let me paint this picture for you. On a Thursday, we got off a plane from Nausea Conference, finished the day out at the office, and then had a late meeting, you know, with BF&J meetings, and then came to work on Friday, writing all these stories and coming up on deadline, and then Saturday was election. So it was like a full, like, 14 days of solid of work, and I was kind of like, okay, I'm grabbing a pizza and I'm going to chill out with the crew. But then they were like, call here, call there. And so you're like, okay, you're just running on fumes, basically, at that point.
Right. And, of course, with print, you've got a little bit of lag time as you pull your facts together and assemble your piece. The challenging part is the electronics, the broadcast, is you've got to fill this time.
Yeah.
And I remember, you've got to run around and talk to candidates as the votes come in and see how they're doing and try not to give them too much time like you're favoring them. And then as things begin to clear up and perhaps winners and losers are starting to show, then you got to fill in, like go ask, well, how do you feel now? You just got trounced in this election. But then, you have to kind of tread delicately sometimes. I remember during a gubernatorial election, the incumbent was winning, and it's always a competition between all the news outlets. This is when you've got an election central, where all of them come together. And then you've got 3 TV stations and a couple of radios and then the newspapers, and they're all looking to pounce as soon as the candidate come in. So I got lucky one year and saw the winning our governor's candidate coming in, who was an Oklahoman, by the way, Tony Knowles.
Okay.
And as he starts coming down the hall, I think, okay, people are going to be all over his tail trying to get a quote.
Yeah, flock on him.
Right. So I fired up my tape deck and, stuck my mic flag out there so make sure that we get it. And I got him just as he was coming down the stairs. So we got the quote from him about how he was doing and what he was, seeing and things like that, all the pertinent and somewhat irrelevant stuff. And we popped over, and while everybody was starting to gang up and trying to get to him, we already had the tape on the air.
Oh, nice. So you scooped them all on that one. That's great.
So take that, NBC.
Yeah, it's always nice. I think that that's like another one of my major, I guess, motivations is to see if I can get the information, package it out before like the big guys, you know what I mean? That's it's kind of like your little self-measurement to see how you're doing, I guess, is to see if you can kind of hang with the big dogs is kind of how I put it. But
well, that's accurate. I mean, you go cover a major story and you've got to compete with these people like network affiliates thinking they're the big dogs and get out of our way just because you're in my presence and I've got to have no, I take my little elbow and punch him in the ribs and say no, you can wait behind the
I've never had to do the physical kind of jockeying for things like that, but I did and this was when George Tiger had his plea change. I had 2 drafts of a story, and I had left the blanks where I needed to just plug in, because we didn't know if he was truly going to change his plea or not. You could show up and he could just be doing something different, and so you kind of draft it for kind of an anticipation of what you believe might happen, and then I left my blank spots to fill in, and then I was like, okay, he did change his plea, and the court hearing was winding down. I stayed to catch the part about sentencing and restitution, but then I beat the big flock of networks to the elevator, got down to the floor, and they were, of course, setting up to do B-roll, hoping to catch him leaving the building. I was already in my car on my smartphone, plugging in those little missing pieces and sending that to the editors so we could publish before they were putting it up. And I think they made it for the 5 o'clock news, but we had it at 3:30 in the afternoon, so I was like, go us.
Yeah, well, that's the advantage of there. And social media has changed so much of this. You know what, let's take a break here, and hopefully our other guest will make it in.
I hope it's not just a reminiscing show.
Yes, but don't be too surprised if it is. Okay, let's see. Well, let's fire off some stuff here.
I started doing it when I was 11. I wanted to be just like my big brother. And some of my friends were already doing it. We got hooked fast. I just can't get enough. I'm Jacob, and I'm addicted to playing the drums.
There's lots of stuff that makes it cool to be native. Doing meth isn't one of them. Find something better to do. Check out ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Tulsa, are you ready for a double dose of Tulsa Oilers hockey this weekend at the BOK Center? The puck drops on Saturday at 7:05 and again on Sunday at 4:05 when the Oilers take on the Rapid City Rush. Stick around on Sunday after the game and skate with the players. Buy your tickets today by phone or text at 918-632-7825 or online at TulsaOilers.com. That's TulsaOilers.com. Plan a weekend of fun with the Tulsa Oilers.
Hear that? That's the sound of Hope being killed by meth. Methamphetamine use is causing huge problems in our community. Hear that? That's the sound of something you can do about it. Events like rodeo, res ball, and family time can help keep kids away from meth.
Talk to your kids. Keep our culture alive. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Learn more at ncai.org.
Okay, we're back here on Mvskoke Radio, doing kind of an ad-lib radio as we go.
We're just going to have talk radio today.
Yeah, really. Too bad we haven't got stuff for sale that we can do.
I know.
Mvskoke Radio or something.
Yes.
With the chance to reminisce is something we don't get to do often, swap war stories and things like that. Now, I think most of our listeners and readers and viewers of the TV show don't often get too much of a chance to see what goes on behind the scenes as we try and cover something like this election. I mean, what we have to report essentially is what they say out in public. Mm-hmm. But behind the scenes it may be an entirely different story.
Yeah, I know Jared had pitched the idea once to do a show of us at the office, navigating work life, and I was kind of oh man. I'm gonna need a sign that says applause or quiet or something, because
go away, leave me alone.
Yeah.
And I hope he's got plenty of beeps too, because our language does go up into the toilet.
FCC, regulations are not privy to some of that. They're not approving all those messages.
Yeah. We're continuing our informal chat here as we were looking for our second scheduled guest, who apparently is not here at the moment. So we're going to continue with what we've got to say. And, in the last 15, 20 minutes, if somebody's got a question or something, a comment they want to make, go ahead and give us a call. We'll take your call.
Yeah, I'll take a caller.
918-756-3646. So give us a buzz and we'll have you give us your thoughts there. The elections are one thing that I kind of dread covering so much, is because it takes all this energy and you've got to be in so many places and walk on thin ice and make sure that you don't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, something that would make people think that we were endorsing a candidate.
Right. That's always my major, in the back of my mind, my hugest dread in the world is to be I feel like most people never know what my personal politics are, and as long as I maintain that, then I am doing good. That's my objective. And if I ever start letting that slip off, I have to do the self-check and really kind of navigate a little better, because that's kind of the biggest example of what not to do, is to be seen as endorsing somebody. And it's a little bit of I would take that as the personal failure, I guess. I would be
it happens. I mean, the first election I covered here, there were actually a couple of people from Mvskoke Communications, as it was at the time, who were actually setting in a candidate's, watch party. And
I've never been to a watch party, not ever. I know that some people, some journalists report from the watch party, and I can see that if you're assigned to do it. If maybe if we had a massive staff, we could do that. We just don't have the crew to do it, so it's never even really been an option. I feel like we have our own watch party, and
well, we do now,
yeah, and we just kind of, and it's kind of cool because the last time around, other journalists from other entities kind of hung out with us, which I thought was pretty neat to have that like their iPads were going down at the locations they were getting the numbers. And so I was like, okay, you know, I'm communicating with them anyways, because I'm asking them if they're seeing any ballot boxes leaving, things like that. And so I'm like, why don't you guys just come and you can, like, you know, hook into our Wi-Fi, as long as you don't hurt our live feed, we're good, you know. And it became kind of a journalist spot. So I kind of thought that was neat to be the journalist watch party. If we had like the nice facility or something, I would love it to be like a public watch party. That would be fun, but I don't know how we would ever navigate that. That's like a wish list kind of thing.
That's a two-edged sword there. You know, one, that you're out there sharing this material with the public and voters, but you also can become a target.
That's
of
true.
this.
Yeah.
And say, you know, them interfering. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, you're favoring this guy. You're saying nice stuff about him, but you haven't said anything about. Okay, just be quiet and go sit down. You know, and go eat some more.
Yeah,
food.
it kind of is nice to have the information broadcasting to the public, to be seeing their comments. It's almost like maybe via live stream watch party, I guess. That way we're not, you know, crossing any lines or anything like that. That is probably it's kind of a protection for us too, to not have to navigate all the public while we're doing the work because it is a little bit gritty and there's a lot of work to be done. I know at one point Jared had to like say, hey, don't cross this line, new person, stay on this side of the line, the equipment's here, don't get in my way. You know, that, and that's kind of like, you know, but it's great to learn that way too. That's kind of how I started out in the business.
He must have been in his glory at the moment.
Yeah. Jared was
that whip.
in there being the scientist with his computers and his wires, and everything was hooked up and rolling, and the cameras, and so he was in his element for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing now that we can do things like that with essentially get away with one person punching all the buttons and making sure. He was
definitely like the one-man producer. We were supporting with making some phone calls, but he was the guy like putting out the stream, and it was pretty unique, because I mean, I say unique, I just remember the years before high-speed internet. You know, like I'm going to tell my age a little bit there. And that was like not possible when I started in the business. Like it really was a more hands-on deck kind of thing to do something like that. And we didn't even have the ability to stream something like that, in addition to the live link to getting those results and stuff like that. We didn't ever have the ability before, like, you know,
there was no stream.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to watch election coverage, you had to tune into a station and stick with it for 3-4 hours. While they essentially repeated the same
night for 3 or 4 hours. I was surprised, and we even kind of worked our band to death, you know, because it took a little bit for those numbers to roll in. I felt pretty bad for those guys. They were real troopers, but. Yeah,
here's one point that I almost missed regarding absentee ballots and ballot boxes. There was some controversy, I believe, about a campaign person collecting absentee ballots for voters.
Yeah, we heard, and I don't know that I've ever seen like this formally addressed, but I heard, I do know that there was complaints filed about it, because we've seen this come out, citizens' complaints happening about election workers offering to help them or take their information, like they take their stuff and make sure it gets turned in, I believe is how it was put. I don't want to be sworn to that, but and there was just, you know, rapid response throughout, like everybody talking to each other and saying, oh my gosh, you know, that you probably shouldn't turn over your ballots to anybody. But then I think that those complaints were filed with the election board, that a few citizens had encountered, and I think it was actually more than a few, but citizens had encountered that people were, you know, requesting to process their stuff for them, and that was kind of a huge, you know, no-no, and like probably added to this mass confusion that's gone on, I think, with that first round of election, that they were saying that it was okay for them to take it, that they, they were a campaign worker, and, they can make sure your absentee ballot gets turned in. And the election board put out the information that they don't ever accept hand-delivered ballots from election workers, was what I think their statement was. And they encourage citizens, like, you get your ballot. We even had to do an informational video to show, like, this is the procedure, and you don't ever at any point hand this off to just another person, but you get your ballot, you vote the way you're going to vote. You put it in the envelopes, you sign it the way, like, there's a signature part of that envelope, you seal it, you put it in the post office box, or, you put it in the mail immediately. And I think that they just wanted to make sure that folks know that there's really not any need, or it's not in the formal process that a third party interjects into that. And I think that brought up a lot of concerns, and you've seen it all over social media, and even confirmed with election board that a formal complaint had been filed on that topic right there for sure. But that's the main message, was protect your ballot.
Don't give it to anybody except put it in the mail. Another thing I think we've heard some discussion on, and another controversy, was that one of the ballot boxes had been broken into. Essentially, the security bands had been cut. So, that doesn't happen all by itself. Somebody had to go in there, and then therefore everything inside was essentially tainted. Yeah.
Right. I was kind of confused about this when I read and reread this Supreme Court's opinion, and they outlined that, they had these ballot boxes brought in, and as they were examining these, they kind of essentially, what they did was they examined the process and the evidence of these ballot boxes. And in their opinion, they state that the procedure goes is that you have these red bands, and they have numbers, serial numbers on them. And once the boxes have the ballots in them, they're secured, and these bands are put on them. And that's, you're kind of, I guess, not a lock, but that
sealed,
if that, right, you've recorded that number for that band, and if that is a different number than what is on there, something's happened. Or if that band is broken, something's happened. And what they found when they opened one of these boxes is that, I think it was an absentee ballot box. They open it up, and inside it is one of those bands, and it's been broken and put into the box. So I think because that had happened, from what I read, and this is just kind of my interpretation from legalese to layman's terms, because that happened, there was the possibility that, no one could explain why that was broken for sure, 100%, or testify kind of. They didn't do an actual investigation into this, so they just kind of said, all right, because this is the fact here that it's a broken band, maybe somebody needed to put some more in, and they put them in and then preserved that band in with it to show that they had broken it for a reason. I don't know, but because it had been broken, we're throwing these results out, and we're going to do this again because there's just this possibility, and there wasn't really anyone who could say, like, beyond a shadow of a doubt, like, why that happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was kind of like there's a gray area, and we're not sure that it wasn't tampered with, and we're not sure that it was, maybe. So we're doing a do-over, but they definitely said in the Supreme Court opinion that those serial numbers weren't recorded as they should have been, and that led them to, that was like the first kind of, okay, without that stuff documented, you can't prove 100% that it's correct, right? So that's kind of, I guess,
or incorrect,
right?
Right.
You couldn't prove it either way.
Yeah, here's a question. We just ask for your opinion. It doesn't necessarily apply to any local or current situations, but we have all kind of griped and groused about tribal elections. And I've seen the same thing happen across the nation. It's just, it seems like our people just can't vote and get get it over with.
Right.
We've had problems here with this, and the Cherokees almost went to civil war over theirs.
Oh, yeah.
A few years back, and it's popped up. Everyone's kind of expects to hear the phrase election fraud during whenever election's going on. Now, asking you for your opinion or your perspective, do you have any thought about why this kind of happens to our people?
I am actually kind of glad you asked me, because I have this theory. I have a theory of why. I think that as a group of people, and this can be any group, whether you want to apply it to being in the national scene as a Republican or a Democrat, or if you want to take it down to even the local level of the tribes, whether they support one candidate or another, what we have is kind of this era of people finding their voice and trying to speak up for themselves. Whereas I think that before, the message was just be a good soldier and fall in line and do what you're supposed to do and go on with your business. Right now, people have learned to advocate for the things that they feel passionately about. And I think that applies to even politics. And you'll see that in some ways, we've abandoned that just acceptance of, politics is just kind of a part of our lives, just a small part. But it's become more of an identity than it used to be, because people are advocating so hard for themselves and what they believe, whether you put the label of liberal or conservative. I remember a time where, like, saying you were liberal or conservative or, Democrat or not, or supported one candidate or another was really no different than saying that I prefer cottage cheese with peaches versus cottage cheese with strawberries. It was your personal choice, and that was just what it was, and we're all part of this grand process. But now people are kind of maybe awakening this self-advocacy, and they expect results when they advocate so much for themselves that they can't quite let go of, well, I didn't win this time, or, like when I see like the neighbors bickering at each other, it's like, you're still neighbors, but they feel so hard that their opinions are right, that everyone should feel that way.
Oh, yeah.
And so they've kind of forgotten that whole, more collective kind of identity that we used to have versus this emergence of the individual and what we want is kind of the focus.
Well, I think as far back as I can remember, and this is showing my age, back in the 60s, I think things were really changing then. Mm-hmm. Young people were questioning authority to the point where it really rocked the foundations of American society. It's like, we used to, your parents told you to do this, you cut your hair a certain way, you go to church, you put a suit on, and a little tie, I remember those little clip-on ties.
Yeah.
And you fall in line, but then all of a sudden people said, wait a minute, why?
You used to part your hair real good and slick, and now people are growing their hair out.
Vitalis and Brill Cream, and the Elvis Pompadour.
Yeah.
And that's apologies to all the Elvis fans out there, but at that point, the music changed, people's opinions of what they saw and what they dealt with were shifting. Mm-hmm. And as I said, the word why, and questioned authority, and sometimes just to question authority. But as you say, people began to speak up for themselves and express those opinions that didn't necessarily fall in line. Mm-hmm. So now that we've taken that to the point where the terms liberal and conservative are almost cuss words. They're nasty kind of things. And, you hear people getting, those blankety-blank liberals and blah, 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 and, they're tearing the country
apart. They even
apart.
have derogatory forms of those words
now,
like they...
And then on the flip side, saying, well, these old hard-ass conservative types, they standing in the way, they want things to go back to the 1950s, and our societal structure was so different. It's like, well, that ain't happening anymore.
So, I think that, the people learned to think for themselves independently and advocate and kind of say, hey, I'm questioning the authority. And then that migrated into, I expect results for the questions that I've posed. You know what I mean? Like now
Yeah,
we're in
yeah.
that phase and we're demanding those results. And so that's kind of the big shift and cycle of it all. Like, you know, you grew up getting to be a little more expressive maybe than your parents. And then,
Oh, yeah.
and then I grew up with those parents who had got to be a little more expressive, and it was absolutely the gospel to be a free thinker in my house. Like, some people tell me that, you know, when they came home, it was, you know, how was your day? And if you said something like this at school happened, and you didn't like it, like in my friend's house, it was, well, don't talk back to your teacher, or, you know, my friends felt like they were stifled in those opinions. Well, I felt like it was a requirement to question, you know, those opinions or those things that I didn't necessarily understand. It wasn't like I'm trying to be offensive in questioning you. I just want to know, and then based on what I know, then I'm that generation that was kind of like brought up, empowered to, you are one of those people who can go out and change the world kind of thing. So I think that's what we have. A lot of people empowered to go out and change the world.
Well, yeah, I guess that's enough for a trip down memory lane there. And, you know, my dad thought it was the communists.
Oh, yeah.
He says, you kids and your long hair and your music, you're selling yourself down the river and those damn communists. Dad, you know, we're not going to listen to a bunch of stupid communists any more than we're going to listen to some guy with a burr hair.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got a couple minutes left. Let's look at some announcements here. It is October 1st through the 26th. The Mvskoke Nation Youth Services are collecting new socks and other essential items for homeless youth. So if you're going to help some young person with some of their personal hygiene needs, clothing for the coming winter, get a hold of those folks at the Youth Services, 549-2557.
I just want to invite everybody out to Council Oak this weekend. It's going to be the big Council Oak ceremony. It happens every year, 2 p.m., October 26th, Creek Nation Council Oak Park, located at 1750 South Cheyenne Avenue in Tulsa. Post activities are at the Tulsa Creek Indian Community, located at 8611 South Union Avenue in Tulsa. I'll be covering Council Oak. Come say hi to me.
So will I. And come down and say hello. Okay, now this event is scheduled for Saturday, October 26th, and it may or may not get changed according to the weather, but it's movie night inside out at the Council House lawn starting at 6 p.m. Costume contest for kids. Bring your own powwow chairs and blankets. Hot cocoa and popcorn provided, but you want to watch the weather on that one.
We got the 13th annual OMNIC Fall Harvest Festival. It's going to take place October 25th, starting on Friday. At 6 p.m. there's the Senior Bingo Wahoo Tournament, and 7 p.m. Softki Contest. 26th, they're going to have Veterans Breakfast, some games, and it's going to carry on throughout the day. All the events will take place at the OMNIC Center, except for the parade and mushball tournament.
Okay, finally, if you're interested in a flu shot, you can check that out today from 11:30 to 1 at the Sapulpa Indian Center. I want to thank Angel Ellis for saving my tail today and helping out. And we're going to get out of here. So thank you for listening to Mvskoke Radio.